And so, the first of the classic jet models getting into the air in the very distinctive shape of the Hawker Hunter. Plenty more to follow. Getting these underway a little earlier than we'd planned, just to bring you some flying action and make sure that they're all away and clear before any of the display aircraft and indeed the C-17 movement that we still hope to have. And the man who's going to be talking you through this display, as ever here at Abingdon, it's a very warm welcome back to David Gladwin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Gladwin, and I'm a member of the Abingdon Jet Group, which fly model jets on this wonderful airfield. We'll be telling you a bit more about the aircraft as they fly, but at the moment we've got Steve Holland, who's flying a Hawker Hunter. This Hawker Hunter is about 1/4 scale of the real aircraft, and it is powered by a gas turbine producing just under 50 pounds of thrust. The model weighs just under 50 pounds, which is the legal limit in this country unless you have special authorization. And the model weighs, I say, just about 50 pounds. The engines in these aircraft are actually not toy aircraft engines, they're real gas turbines, and they're all basically the same as the Whittle engine of 1944. A centrifugal compressor, an axial flow turbine, and the fuel used in these
requirements on the part of both the Army Air Corps
and the Westland Scout
of the Royal Navy. We see it here in its Army Air Corps guise to start the flying programme at the 2024 Abingdon Air and Country Show, the Westland Scout AH-1. The naval version of this helicopter became known as the Wasp, and that has a wheeled undercarriage. This Army derivative, the Scout, has a skid undercarriage, and it was ordered in quantity for the Army Air Corps as a battlefield helicopter coming into service in 1963. And it really was an advance because it was the first true anti-tank helicopter for the British Army. Its main armament was the SS-11 wire-guided anti-tank missile, but it could also carry 5 or 6 troops in the cabin, and a boost to the armament could be provided by general-purpose machine guns fired through the cabin door or mounted on those landing gear skids. And it was the mainstay of the Army Air Corps for battlefield operations until the Western Wings came along. Scouts like this served in many overseas theatres in which British forces were engaged. They were involved in the Aden and Radfan emergency of the mid-1960s, which was caused by uprisings against British rule in what was then the Aden Protectorate, now part of Yemen. And perhaps most famously, they saw rather belated action in the 1982 Falklands conflict. Scouts there flew special forces insertions, they flew their own attack missions with those SS-11 missiles, casualty evacuations and more. And it was a Scout of No. 3 Commando Brigade Air Squadron, the Royal Marines Air Support Unit, which was shot down by a FMA IA-58 Pucara counterinsurgency aircraft of the Argentine Air Force near Goose Green, and therefore became Argentina's only air-to-air victory of that whole conflict. Giving you a good view of the helicopter as it transitions now along the display line. These Scout helicopters were very familiar sights from their years in Northern Ireland and the British Army of the Rhine in West Germany. In Northern Ireland, they used what called then a very sophisticated system of artillery technology for reconnaissance duty, performing air-to-ground surveillance with the external camera on the helicopter and the internal monitor, which would be watched by the observer. The pictures would be transmitted back to ground stations. Then, through by night, goggles and cruise helicopters. From our left, the very distinctive sight of the de Havilland Vampire T11.
And next to me is the Vampire T11.
And the lovely harmonious whistling sound of the de Havilland Goblin turbojet engine. Why does this aircraft look like this, you might wonder? Well, de Havilland decided to adopt this twin tail boom layout to make the jet climb shorter and minimise the loss of thrust from the single engine, because this was Britain's first production single engine fighter. It was the Meteor, which came earlier, was a twin. And that Goblin engine, as I said, a product of de Havilland as well, because that company famously made aero engines as well as airframes. And the construction of this aeroplane is very interesting in itself. De Havilland had a lot of experience with wooden airframes, particularly you think of the likes of the wartime Mosquito, for instance. And the structure of the Vampire mixes wood and metal. That fuselage pod you can see up front has a core made of balsa wood with layers of birch veneer inside and outside, but the wings, the tail booms and the tail itself are all metal. And when it came into service with the RAF in 1945, it was Britain's second operational jet fighter after the Meteor, although it was too late to see any wartime service. The first Vampires were pure day fighters, but when World War II ended, these aircraft began to notch up some incredible firsts in aviation history. For example, it was that famed naval test pilot, Captain Eric Winkle-Brown, who used a Vampire to make the first ever aircraft carrier landing and takeoff to be performed by a jet aircraft in history. That was aboard HMS Ocean in December 1945. Vampire was developed through many different versions. It was particularly successful as a fighter bomber. The RAF squadrons flying them in overseas theatres, for example, as part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force in Germany, along with in the Middle East and Far East. They were used as counterinsurgency aircraft against Malayan terrorists in the 1950s. And then there were the two-seat versions, starting off with a night fighter and then moving on to what we see here, the two-seat T11 trainer, which first flew in November 1950. And this was a very significant aircraft for the RAF because it was the first jet aircraft on which RAF pilots gained their flying wings. And it carried on operating as a trainer right through until 1967 when the Fond Nat arrived. Very nice banked, curving topside pass here. Really showing you the aircraft's aligned well. This is a really important aircraft, the one we see here. And for an early Christmas present for Peter Thatcher and the team behind the restoration. And very fittingly, Bob Foster, who flew it so often during the Battle of Britain, was able to see it on many, many occasions before his passing. Peter Thatcher continued operating the Hurricane privately for a good number of years, and here it is now. Since 2015, this aircraft has been in the ownership of James Brown, who lives in Oxford. He operates it under the Hurricane Heritage banner. It's based at Duxford, with the Aircraft Restoration Company operating it, and he's very proud to present it at Abingdon once again, the Hawker Hurricane 1. Fairey Swordfish 1.
Okay, next display now is the Fairey Swordfish 1.
Squadrons of the Fleet Air Arm had Swordfish when war broke out in September 1939. In reality, the Fleet Air Arm should have had a far more modern aeroplane in the torpedo bombing role by that stage. It really is a representative of the sort of complacency about future threats and the muddles that went on around military procurement during the 1930s. But this aircraft still had a leading role to play. But play a leading role it did. Its first combat actions were in Norway in 1940 and then in the Mediterranean. Swordfish were able to fly off aircraft carriers, but they could also be launched by catapult in float plane form from Royal Navy battleships. And I mentioned some of the famous actions in which Swordfish were involved. Well, their names that are well known to many. Taranto, for example, that was in November 1940. Fleet Air Arm Swordfish found the Italian fleet in port there. 21 Swordfish flying off the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious effectively knocked the entire Italian fleet out of the war in an attack which famously provided part of the inspiration behind the tactics the Japanese used at Pearl Harbor the following year. Coming in with an initial side slip down the display line, showing you the patriotic colour scheme on this aeroplane. And he'll be transitioning out of that into a wingover. This particular pit dates from 1977 when it was factory built in the United States and it was exported into the UK.
Now, next display is the Jubilee
notable
Kit
display
special.
and competition pilots have flown it over the years, including the former Red Bull Air Race world champion Nigel Lamb. Iain then bringing it in on a 45-degree line in towards us and pulling up for the first of his Humpty bumps, pushing over uncomfortably at the top and executing a quarter roll to bring the aircraft back onto the main display axis. That's what we call the A axis, running parallel to the main runway. Now up he goes, the speed bled off, and he entered a boot full of rudder to fly a stall turn to turn around, and he'll now be pulling up into a loop. A very short coupled biplane this, with outstanding control response and a very, very high rate of roll indeed. In fact, it can roll through 180 degrees per second. And now as he goes up towards the right-hand end of the line, Iain pulls up, rolls inverted and pulls through. Down the A-axis and up again. Quarter roll on the way up. And he's using all the performance at his disposal from the 180 horsepower Lycoming engine. Another stall turn to reverse the direction. Now a single aileron roll, followed by a second. Now as he heads vertical, he pulls round as if to loop. There you can see him rolling the right way up again on the down line. Whether he resumes the display from the point at which he terminated it there, while we were getting that vehicle on its way, or whether he restarts from the beginning. I suspect he's going to restart from the beginning, so in he comes, and yes, again, pulling up at display data for his initial loop. Nice constant back pressure on the stick to achieve an accurate loop and attain the necessary gate height at the top of the maneuver to enable him to pull through. And there, yes, he's resuming there where he left off, performing a wing over out to the right to bring the aircraft back round onto the display line. And next up, he's going to be performing a barrel roll. So named because the aircraft will basically describe the inside of a barrel lying on its side. You can see the point. And once he's repositioned up at the left-hand end, he'll be coming in from the opposite end for more of the same. And here he comes once again, pulling up and rolling around the inside of that imaginary barrel. Yakolev were renowned for their aerobatic aircraft, and the single-seat Yak-50 won the Soviet Union great success in competition aerobatics from the 1970s onwards. And the two designs, the single-seat 50 and this two-seat 52, very closely related. In fact,
and now, the final display team, Ah, 4 Gazelles. The Gazelle Squadron.
The pilot for today is Tim Gray, a former Royal Marine, he's a current RAF officer. I'm the C-17, in fact, with number 99 Squadron at RAF Prize York. He's got 8,000 flying hours in his logbooks, and 3,000 of those have been spent flying Gazelles like these. And he's a former member of the illustrious Army Air Corps helicopter display team, the Blue Eagles, and he's flying a really interesting Gazelle. You might have spotted it's got a big nose probe on the front, and this is one that was only retired very few years ago by the UK's test and trials organisation Kinetic at Boscombe Down in Wiltshire, and it still carries Kinetic's markings and that test probe mounted on the nose. One of the ideas of the Gazelle Squadron is to show just how widely this helicopter was operated by the UK's flying services. So apart from Kinetic and its predecessor organisations such as the Aeroplane Armaments Experimental Establishment and Evaluation Establishment at Boscombe Down and the Royal Aircraft Establishment, it was used in the RAF for basic helicopter training and certain other roles. It was used in the Army Air Corps as a battlefield support, observation helicopter, and for training, also for training and VIP transport in the Royal Navy, and indeed VIP transport was one of its other functions in the RAF, Aerospatiale, as part of their collaboration in the 1960s. So the 4 Gazelles then, running in front of us, and they're getting ready to perform their roulette break. Tim Gray calls break, break, go, and there they split asunder. Although it's a little bit difficult looking into sun as we are now to see the different colour schemes on the 4 machines in the display today in quite the detail that we'd like. I can tell you that number 2 for today's display is an aircraft in the colours of number 32 Squadron. That's the second of the 2 Gazelles quietly heading off towards the right-hand end in formation with the team lead. Number 32 Squadron then is now the RAF's VIP Transport Squadron, and has operated a number of Gazelle HCC4 models in that role. This is just actually one of those that's been painted in those colours, and that helicopter is today in the hands of Merrick Forsyth as Gazelle 2. That helicopter is today being flown as Gazelle 3 by Richard Mitchell. Mitch is one of the longest serving members of the Gazelle Squadron display team. He started off as an Army apprentice avionics technician, but decided to transition to flying training. He flew the Gazelle operationally and the Lynx, including operations during the First Gulf War and later on in Kosovo and Albania. He actually carried on flying the Gazelle as a military reservist, and today he is a captain for Virgin Atlantic on the Airbus A350, and he acts as the flight safety officer for the Gazelle Squadron team. As you can see, they've now got back into formation together. And the 4th helicopter is in the red and white colours of 705 Naval Air Squadron of the Royal Navy, with a sharp motif on the tail. recalling the days when that squadron used to provide the Royal Navy helicopter display team, the Sharks. It's the one bringing up the rear as they fly past you here, and Jim Richards is the man in the cockpit today. You might be wondering as you watch these helicopters, why haven't they got a visible tail rotor? Well, it's just enclosed in the helicopter's tail in what's known as a fenestron arrangement. Very characteristic of the Gazelle and other helicopter designs produced much more recently by what's now Airbus helicopters. One of the big advantages, of course, is that it means it's much easier to operate in confined spaces without the risk of the tail rotor touching any obstacles. So now the three-ship formation entering from the right, and there Gazelle 4 diving down to pass underneath them. In the Falklands, in the First Gulf War, in the Balkans during the 1990s, and in Afghanistan, and Army Airfield Gazelles were heavily committed in Northern Ireland, just like the Scout we saw at the start of the programme as well. And there, the team leader over the radio calling his colleagues into line astern formation, basically follow my leader.